Good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Having a little technical difficulties here, but we hope that we'll be able to override and to go through with the live tonight. So make sure that you come on quickly so that if anything, we can end the live on time. Right? The screen is not behaving well tonight. Now, today we are going to be looking at tonight rather because it's 8 o'clock my time, 8:07. So it's nice. So good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this live program, this live discussion. Trump's Iran peace deal and won't last. And we are looking at Daniel 2 in terms of what the Bible talks about in terms of these nations and these kingdoms that we're looking at, these nation states. Now, during challenging moments, leaders confronting uncertainty, war, illness, or events they perceive as beyond human control, history provides many examples of rulers turning to sources outside conventional politics. And that is what people need to understand, that a lot of time we're looking through these nations and we look at them through the lens of politics. And we think that politics is the only thing that is involved in the decisions that these leaders make from day to day. But it is not so. Some have sought prayer and religious counsel. Some have consulted clergy. Some have consulted astrologers, as in the well-known case involving Nancy Reagan and her husband. Some have been influenced by mystical, esoteric, or occult ideas. So that's what we have to understand, that, beyond the politics, beyond human beings, people also look at the religious realm, the spiritual realm, in terms of how things are worked out, in terms of leading the nation, the decisions that they need to make. Some have relied on prophets, seers, or spiritual advisors in various cultures and periods. This is not unique to the United States. From Babylon and Egypt to Rome, medieval kingdoms, modern democracies, and communist states, leaders have often sought meaning, legitimacy, or guidance from sources they believed transcended ordinary human wisdom. From a biblical perspective, one could argue that the issue is not whether a society formally separates religion and politics, but what ultimately commands allegiance and trust. The prophets of Israel frequently criticized rulers who claimed to rely on God while simultaneously trusting on other powers, alliances, idols, or spiritual practices. So if your argument is that the political power is rarely as secular as it presents itself, there is a substantial historical discussion to be had here. Human beings, including rulers, often reach beyond the purely material and confronted with questions of destiny, survival, legitimacy, or the unknown. The debate is usually over which spiritual influences are at work and how much evidence exists for identifying them. Okay, so that's what we have to understand. Tonight, I want to make a point that often gets overlooked when we talk about empires, governments, and political power. We are told that the United States is a secular state, that religion and politics are separate, and that the government operates according to reason, law, and institutions. But if we examine history honestly, the picture is much more complicated. The question is not whether there is a formal separation of church and state. The question is whether political power ever truly operates apart from spiritual beliefs. Now, religious assumptions or appeals to forces beyond the material world. When we look at ancient Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, we see a religio-political empire. Political authority and spiritual authority were intertwined. The king ruled by power, but he also sought legitimacy through religion, omens, priests, dreams, and the gods of his civilization. Many people assume that modern nations are fundamentally different, yet history suggests that when leaders face war, economic collapse, assassination attempts, social unrest, uncertainty, or events they cannot control, they often reach beyond conventional politics. Throughout history, rulers have sought guidance from priests, prophets, spiritual advisors, astrologers, mystics, and religious leaders. That's what we have to understand, and this is what we're here to highlight this in in tonight's program rather. Some have turned to prayer, others have sought wisdom from occult traditions, esoteric teachings, or spiritual practices outside mainstream religion. And in Trump's case, we can see that he always is praying, right? He's calling people to the White House to pray for him, and they're praying for the nation. So this is what we're seeing happening right now in the United States. This is not unique to Babylon. It is not unique to Europe. It's not unique to America. It appears to be a recurring feature of political power itself. The deeper issue is that human beings, no matter how powerful they become, eventually encounter realities they cannot fully explain or control. At that point, many seek answers beyond politics, beyond economics, and beyond military power. From a biblical perspective, the central question is not whether a nation calls itself religious or secular. The question is, what does that nation ultimately trust? What does it serve? What does it look for? Salvation or security and guidance. Ancient Babylon trusted its gods, its wealth, and its imperial power. Rome trusted its gods, its military might, and eventually the divine status of emperor. Modern societies may not bow before statues of Marduk or Baal, but they can still elevate power, wealth, technology, military dominance, nationalism, ideology, or even state itself into objects of ultimate trust. So in that sense, the lesson of Babylon is not merely about ancient idols. It's about the tendency of every empire to surround itself with symbols, beliefs, rituals, and sources of authority that justify and sustain its power. Whether one agrees with that conclusion or not, history shows that politics and spirituality have rarely been as separate as they appear. Behind the public institutions, laws, and speeches, there has often been a deeper struggle over meaning, legitimacy, destiny, and the forces that guide nations. That is why the story of Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon remains relevant today. It is not simply an ancient story about a king and his empire. It is a story about power, belief, and the enduring relationship between political authority and the spiritual ideas that stand behind them. So tonight we're going to be looking at that, at Daniel 2 more specifically, and we shall be delving into what happens when powers begin to consult religion and spiritual realm, particularly in the occult realm. Now, tonight's topic is Trump's Iran peace deal won't last. Daniel 2 predicted it. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are going to examine a bold question. Why do so many peace agreements, alliances, and diplomatic breakthroughs eventually fail? And what if the answer was given over 2,500 years ago in the book of Daniel? I'm not arguing that Daniel predicted Donald Trump by name. He didn't. I'm not arguing that Daniel predicted Iran by name. It didn't. What I'm arguing is that Daniel 2 reveals a principle governing world politics that is just as relevant today as it was in the days of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, we saw here a statue, Daniel's statue, and I want to present that statue to you on the screen for you to see the statue. So let me share my screen here with you so we can look at the statue of Daniel 2, and we shall be looking a lot about these major powers that Daniel 2,500 years ago or more did actually predict, right? So let me now show you that screen. Hopefully be able to go right on my screen is here. This is the image of it, Iran peace. I think it might be this. No, it's not this. It's here. Did I have this is on my screen? It seems like I took off that thing off my screen. Let me see if I could get back another one of the image of Daniel. It was here and I actually did not get it for you guys. Give me a second. Let me get that image up on the screen of Daniel. All right. It's very important that we have that screen up on the platform. So we have image of Daniel 2, right? So we're going to get this up on the screen. So this is what I think I had here. Okay, let me see this. This probably is better. This is probably a better image, maybe not. Let me look for the image I had that seemed to have been deleted from the screen. Okay, maybe I can have this. Okay, I'm gonna use this. It's not the best one, but I'm going to use it anyway. Of it, and it's not coming up. It's not coming up here. Let me see where it is. How could I have had that thing off my screen? Okay, so we have that. Give me a second, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to pull back up that image I had on the screen, which seemed to have been deleted, unfortunately. So let me go and see again if I can have that on my screen. Ooh. But Daniel saw an image, right? And the image represented major powers of the world, all right? So we're going to be, the king had a dream, that was Nebuchadnezzar, that he had forgotten. So because he forgot his dream, he called the sorcerers and the astrologers and great men, the men of the occult, right? Religious men, spiritual men, to tell him the dream that he had forgotten, right? However, they weren't able to tell him the dream. They're saying, King, how are you going to ask us to tell you a dream that you have forgotten? That is not within the realm of human beings, right? It suggested that if you wanted to tell us the dream or the meaning of the dream, the interpretation of the dream, then you will have to tell us, King, what you saw in the dream, but you can't tell us to remind you of the dream. I'm trying to put up an image here. Perhaps you will see that a better image of what I had on the screen, but it's just not coming up. All right, so while the image, I'm still trying to find the image, let's go and talk about, I might have to postpone this one here, this image that I'm trying to show you. But in this context, Daniel, as I'm suggesting to you, was a king, was a person, one of the Jewish people who lived in the Babylonian Empire. I'm trying to get this image up and it's not coming up. Right. And as he was there, the king had a dream, and the king suggested that Daniel, and not Daniel, but the astrologers and the sorcerers and the spiritual men, those people who were in the cult, should tell him what the dream was, and then they would be able to tell him the meaning. However, the king could not remember, right? He could not remember what he had dreamt. And sometimes we dream things and we forget, right? We don't remember what. But the king thought that the dream that he had was significant, a dream for Daniel, for him to remember, because it was something that was really on his mind. And he was saying, now, if you are sorcerers and you claim all these powers that you can see into the future, perhaps that they could read the mind, then you should be able to tell me what this dream is all about. But the fact of the matter, the people said to him that these people who were into the occult, right, the esoteric world, told him that they could not tell him the meaning or the interpretation without him telling them the dream. Okay, let me put this up, this image here on the screen for you to see. This is what I was trying to get up on the screen. And let me begin to share my screen another time and show you the image that we can have a good discussion, and you can get a picture of the image that the king had seen. So let me get it here. This is the Daniel 2 chart. Yeah, so let me see if I could now put it up on the screen. And I'm going to say enter, and hopefully it gets there. I go back here to the screen and show it on the screen. So we're going to have it on the screen. Hopefully you'll see it. Are you seeing it? Can you see the screen? Can you see the image? Let me add it to the stage. All right, so if you see that, I think perhaps now you'll be able to see the image. Right, so we have here Daniel 2 and Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So we can see here he saw a body of a man, right? So from the head, we can see the head, and we can see right down to his two legs, right? Let me see if so we have here gold the head of gold was Babylon. The head of gold represented Babylon, which was the ruling world power from 612 to 539 BC. So here is what the king dreamt, that he saw, okay, a statue, right, of a man. And he could see different parts of the body. And we're moving down to the silver, which represent Medo-Persia, which was the chest. Okay, the chest of silver represented Medo-Persia and the ruling world power from 539 to 331 BC. Now, Medo-Persia is what we call today as modern Iran. And Babylon, okay, then is what is known as modern Iraq. All right, so that's also very interesting for you to know. Now, we talk about now the thighs. When he went down to the thighs, he saw the thighs, okay, which represents Greece, right? The thighs of bronze represented Greece, the dominant world ruler from 331 to 168 BC. Then we move down now into the legs, right? So we move from the head, okay, that he saw on the statue, which represents Babylon, and that we know that Babylon was a real empire, and it lasted from 612 to 539 BC. And then we're talking now about Medo-Persia followed Babylon, because even though Babylon thought it was never going to die, just like the United States, all major empires think that they will never die. In the heat of their time, in the height or pinnacle of their empire, if their imperial dominion, they never think that they will die. Then we have here the iron now, and we know that the Roman Empire is known as the empire of the Iron Empire. So the legs of iron represented Rome, which enjoyed the world supremacy from 168 BC to 476 BC. After that, Rome was divided. So we can see here that Rome is divided. We have two legs that Rome represented. And some biblical scholars say that one side of the Roman Empire was the eastern part, which we talked about on last Sunday in our live. And also we had the western part of the Roman Empire. So we had Rome East and Rome West. What we're living in now, for the most part, are division states, all divided states, I should say, of the Roman Empire. The feet that were partly iron and partly clay represented a divided empire that would not cleave together. Remember that Rome fell in 476. Okay, the united Rome, we have United States of America. You also had united Rome, and it fell in 476 AD. Or AD 476, right? So now what we've got, well, after that fell, we had what is known as divided Rome or papal Rome, okay? And we can see here the two legs, but guess what? The legs, the iron was mixed with clay. What does that mean, that iron is mixed with clay? Now, the clay actually weakened the iron. So it means, therefore, that Rome was not as strong when it was divided. Just like the United States, some people are suggesting that, oh, Texas might leave, or Louisiana might leave, or California might leave. But if any of those states should leave the United States, it is not going to last at all. Because when you have divided empires in terms of divided states or nation states, then the empire is going to weaken, which happened in Rome, or happened to Rome. So the feet that were partly iron and partly clay represented a divided empire that would not cleave together. They wanted Rome to remain united, but the clay sort of weakened it. Now let's think about the iron as representing perhaps the political realm of the empire, while the clay represented perhaps the religious aspect of that empire. These are just speculations, but the fact of the matter is that this Roman Empire was divided. So no single power has ruled the world since AD 476. What we've had are forms of the divided Roman Empire. So we had Britain, France, England, well, England is Britain, Spain, and the other parts of the divided Roman Empire that have ruled the world. And many people have suggested, of course, that the United States is a part of the divided Roman Empire. Now, ultimately, Daniel reports that a stone, the king says, not Daniel reporting, but the king in his dream says that he saw a stone after all of these kingdoms. He saw a stone without hand, okay, that, actually destroyed and crushed all these kingdoms. And that is, of course, the biblical Bible scholars have suggested, and it makes sense that that stone without hand refers to Christ, and he is going to set up his eternal kingdom and his law, because after all these all these kingdoms and kings, now kings here don't refer to one king, right? It refers that one kingdom can have many presidents, can have many kings, right? And that is what this here image is suggesting. So here, this was a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, which he could not remember, and Daniel was the person who was called. Well, he wasn't really called. He was the one who told them that he would pray to God, and God revealed, right, the dream to him, but not only the dream, but the interpretation of the dream that the king had. So let me look at again. We talk about the image here. We have the head of gold. We have the chest, right, of silver. And we know that Medo-Persia is known as the Silver Empire. Greece, the bronze, right, is the Bronze Empire, and the thighs. So these are factual. History actually substantiates, corroborates that these empires exist, and we can see the metals. They are represented by the metals that that was dominant in their time. And then we have Rome now was the Iron Empire. It started off as the Iron Empire in 168 BC to 476 AD. And now we see that empire was divided, and it became a papal. It was divided, and when it was divided, what had to have happened? Just like the world is fractured and divided now, Rome, through the papacy, was what was sent to glue it back, but it represented a dark age where persecution was rife in Western Europe. So this is something that is very interesting, and we are going to look at the moment. Let me stop sharing my screen. If I can stop here sharing the screen, and we can go back now to discussing aspects of this, what this means. Now, Daniel sees a succession of empires. Babylon, and we saw that, which is the head of gold, Medo-Persia, and we see the chest, right, of silver, Greece, and we saw the thighs represented Greece, which was the Bronze Age, right? The Bronze Empire. And Rome. Rome is known as the Iron Empire. But we also have divided Rome. So then Rome becomes divided. The iron remains, but it is mixed with clay. And so we're hearing our world leaders talking about peace. But how is peace going to come again when the nations are divided? In Daniel 2, verse 41 to 43, for those of you who don't, you can go to Daniel 2, verse 41 to 43. The iron and clay are described as a kingdom that is partly strong and partly what? Fragile. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. And we know that Europe, Western Europe particularly, they went through arms and legs to ensure that they ensure that Rome will continue to be united by even marrying into their own families, right? To keep the bloodline together and united. But the Bible says that the iron and the clay shall not cleave one to another. They shall not cleave one to another. And peace, as they are trying to gain, cannot be had through errors and built on lies and built on, evil, as it were. The traditional historicist interpretation is iron, the continuing strength of Rome, its laws, institutions, which we still have, military tradition, which we still have, and political power, which we still have, represented by the United States. Now, the clay is equivalent to elements of weakness, division, and fragmentation among the successor kingdoms. And we can see that there are divisions even in Europe, even between the United States and Europe. Now we're seeing lots of division where Europe, Western Europe specifically, do not see eye to eye with the United States. However, there have been other interpretations throughout Christian history. The interpretation that I'm suggesting here is that the iron represents political power and the clay represents religious power, can be developed as it's a symbolic sort of gesture when you have the iron that is strong, that is dominant, represented by the political, the military, the economic side of the empire, right? It seems that when these are collapsing, then what the empire calls for is religion to help the state to enforce its laws, because religion has a potent force on people's mentality, on their psychology. When you say that thus saith the Lord of hosts, and if you don't do it, then you are going against God, then people generally obey empires. That's how it works, right? Whether you're religious or not, you'll have to obey what the king says. And kings here, when we say king, kings believe that they get their divine right to rule by God himself. Now, this is not what the Bible teaches, but this is how they are interpreting it. And remember now that this is not just a biblical thing. The people of the ancient world, the ancient empires, all had religion at the forefront, and that is what they used. Now, Western Europe, particularly the United States, was that nation that says, religion should be separate from politics. But when we look at the United States, from a very close up point, we are seeing that religion does play a pivotal role in policy decisions. Now, one way of understanding the iron and clay is to see iron as political authority, okay, and clay as religious authority. That's something I wanted to imagine. Throughout history, rulers have repeatedly attempted to fuse political power with religious legitimacy. Kings sought the blessing of priests, emperors sought divine approval, governments often wrapped themselves in sacred language, yet the mixture never fully held together. Why? Many of them don't even understand and don't want to be religious. They're just using that institution, the religious institution, so that they can gain some power and control. Remember now that your rulers are human beings, so they live in human realm. And they don't understand everything as you think they understand. They can't see the future because human beings cannot tell you what's going to happen in the future, right? So they're very much limited to a large extent. So many times when they don't understand what is happening in the physical, material realm, they seek spiritual advice from some of these spiritual leaders. Some of them go to other people, they go to voodoo priests, they go to astrologers, all right? People who are in that spiritual realm. And I told you about Reagan and his wife, Nancy Reagan, and after he was shot, right, that she actually, tried to communicate with the spiritual realm, right, to understand, to gain meaning into what does this mean for the future of the Reagan presidency. Now, so Nebuchadnezzar ruled politically. Babylonian priests supplied religious legitimacy and advice, and they also were able, according to them, that it wasn't true, and that's why Nebuchadnezzar got so angry and wanted to kill them, because they claimed that they could tell him what was going to happen in the future, which they couldn't. Empire and religion reinforced one another. Then Rome now, political authority and religious authority became intertwined. Emperors often exercised both civic and sacred functions. Now, that was the order of the day in their times. We are living and we have become accustomed to religion not playing a very important or a dominant role in politics because our constitutions forbade that to happen. However, in ancient times, including in Africa, right, religion, that's why many people will tell you, many Pan-Africanists will tell you that there is no difference in Africa in terms of religion and politics. Everything is all intertwined, right? Because that is how the world used to be, where religion and politics, it was just natural for them to be fused. Very important that you understand this. Now, monarchies claim divine sanction. States relied on religious institutions for legitimacy, as we were saying. Religious institutions often relied on political protection. And finally, to the modern world, even societies that claim to separate religion and politics often find the two interacting in complex ways. Political leaders seek moral legitimacy. So they're telling you about the war in Iran, all right? And they're trying to claim that it is moral to protect us from the Iranians, even though that is not true. But they're using the institution of religion to sanction and to legitimize what they're doing, while religious movements seek influence over public life. The challenge is that Daniel itself does not explicitly say, and I want to say that here very clearly, iron is equal to politics or clay is equal to religion. That is an interpretive application rather than the direct explanation given in the text. Now, what we have to understand is that religion gives the state, when the state becomes weak, because that is what is happening now, the state has lost its legitimacy. Most of us are telling ourselves that government, which is true, they are wicked, they're brutal, they're liars. Everywhere you go now, people are talking about their government, that the government cannot be trusted. Nothing they say, people are feeling that is true. What most people are not saying, only you'll find probably secularists will say that they don't like religion and religion is this and religion is that, and they don't trust their pastors too and so forth. However, when you see a priest like the Pope, right? Many people look at what the Pope has done and the institution that he represents. But people still think when he wears that white robe that he is giving some legitimacy to whatever the empires or the political realm are doing, the politicians are doing. So even the other day when Pope Leo XIV had the spat with Trump, many people fell on the side of the Pope, not remembering what the institution that the Pope actually symbolizes and what he represents. They think that he still is a symbol of moral authority more than Donald Trump is. But is he? No, he's not. But the fact of the matter is what he represents in the minds of many people. Now, that approach gives you, so that is what we have to say. So in Daniel 2, verse 43, we hear that they will mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So we're finding that our politicians are trying to unite this world because they realize that the world is fractious. People no longer believe in politics, in politicians, in governments. So they are saying we have to come together so that we can control these people. If not, then we are going to lose our legitimacy. Now, in order to do that, they're using elements of religion to do that. And this is the critical point. The final phase of world history is characterized by attempts at unity that never fully succeed. So we're seeing treaties here now, and I'm going to go over to the treaty or the agreement, the peace deal that Trump suggests that he has signed with Iran. And so let me stop sharing my screen. Let me go to the peace treaty here. And we have here, this is coming from the NPR, right? And they have the peace deal that Trump signed with Iran. And it says here, the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America. The Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America have jointly agreed in good faith on 2026 on the following. And they're saying here, number one, the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America and their allies in the current war, by signing this MOU, that's Memorandum of Understanding, declare the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon, and undertake from now on to initiate any war or any military operation against each other, and to refrain from the threat or the use of force against each other, and ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. The final deal they're suggesting, this perhaps is not the final deal, will confirm the permanent termination of the war on all fronts, including Lebanon and other provisions of this paragraph. Will there be a final deal in terms of a permanent peace talk? There won't be, because the iron, as we're suggesting, and the United States is still representative of divided Rome. The iron will not mix with the clay, and because they are not going to cleave one to another, no matter what they do, and they're trying in their own way, even though we know that it is deception. Now, number two, the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America undertake to respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity and to refrain from interfering in each other's internal affairs. No, you tell me when the United States is refraining or has refrained from interfering in other people's business. It has never. And that is why it's sending deportees to Jamaica and all over the world. The Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America commit to negotiating and achieving the final deal in maximum 60 days, extendable with mutual consent. So the war is going to continue because they're saying here in maximum 60 days, extendable. So we're going to see another peace deal again, maybe after day 60, because the war is not going to stop. The United States wants to control the world. Right? The United States believes it is the new Rome. The United States of America believes that it is the new Rome. And it's doing everything like the Roman Empire because it is a divided Roman Empire. It doesn't understand that it's divided. It doesn't want to heed the biblical counseling that the clay, and the iron cannot mix and that they shall not cleave one to another. It still believes that it can, because it is ruled and controlled by another power. Now, number four, immediately upon the signing of this MOU, the United States of America will begin to removal of its naval blockade and any disturbances or impediments against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and will fully end the naval blockade within 30 days. During this period, the traffic of vessels will be in proportion to the numbers of pre-war traffic being restored by the Islamic Republic of Iran. The United States of America further undertakes to remove its forces from the proximity of the Islamic Republic of Iran within 30 days after the final deal. Now, when will the final deal be? It's extendable, all right? So it could be whatever. We don't know, right? Infinity. Now, number five, upon the signing of this MOU, the Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. The traffic of commercial vessels will immediately start, and considering the need for removing the technical and military obstacles and demining by the Islamic Republic of Iran will be instated within 30 days. The Islamic Republic of Iran will conduct dialogue with the Sultanate of Oman to define the future administration and maritime services in the Strait of Hormuz in discussions with other Persian Gulf littoral states in line with applicable international law and sovereign rights of coastal states of the Strait of Hormuz. So here we're seeing these people talking, right? And they talk a lot. And they write a lot. They draft lots of peace deals. We can't read all of what they're saying. I have read it, but, I can't read everything here on the platform because this is just too much. But this is just the mere empty words. Some mere empty words. Because at the end of the day, we've seen these before, these peace treaties before, that they never work. Why? Because as we're suggesting here, empires want to control. And the United States wants to control the entire world. The entire world, and that is what she's doing. So whatever peace deal she's doing right here is just a facade. It's just a facade. And Trump knows that, and the people behind the scenes know that, but they have to give us this illusion. But very soon, they are going to pick up the pieces and tell us that this empire is evil. And when they use the word evil, they are appealing to our religious sensibilities, because then they're using the religious arm of the state to do and to justify its wars. So there will be treaties, there will be alliances, there will be coalitions, there will be international organizations, there will be diplomatic breakthroughs. And you might see a diplomatic breakthrough for some months, who tell maybe a year or two, but they shall not cleave one to another. And that is why we will never have peace in this world. Yet beneath the surface remain competing interests, rival civilizations, religious divisions between Christians and Muslims and other sects, economic conflicts, because we know that some countries don't like the neoliberal, some countries are communist, some countries are socialist, so they're not going to, and they resist capitalism or any other whatever economic model that you're trying to impose on that country. And geopolitical ambitions, all of them have their geopolitical ambitions, whether they are international, global, or regional. And that is what we have to understand. Now, the iron and the clay, think about the modern world. We have to look at the modern world in terms of the iron and the clay, as what's his name, Daniel 2 described. Remember now that we're still under the Roman Empire, whether we like it or not. We are still under the Roman Empire, especially under the iteration of the Western Roman Empire. The United States is just a part of divided Rome. The United States and Europe are allies, yet frequently they disagree, right? So sometimes we talk about the white people, and we don't understand that it has nothing to do with white people, right? This is about power. And even though they are what you call white, they are divided. That is why Europe is divided. The Germans don't like the British don't like the Germans, and all of these things, right? They don't like each other too. We're the ones, and then Mr. Pereira says, as he says it so eloquently, that there are tribes also in Europe. There are tribes, just like we're tribalistic also in Africa. NATO members often have conflicting priorities. China and Russia cooperate, yet they are not identical partners. The Middle East is filled with temporary alliances that shift with changing interests. Even within nations themselves, political polarization is increasing. I repeat that. Even within nations themselves, political polarization is increasing. We can see that there is a stark difference between Republicans and Democrats. And the entire nation of the United States is polarized. They too are not united. So the nation there is going to collapse, just like all our different nation states. Now, when our nations collapse, what are the politicians going to use to control the masses? Religion. And it's going to be a state religion. And that is where the toxicity lies. And we've got to be careful. We've got to be on our P's and on our Q's. The world seeks unity, but unity remains elusive. That is iron and clay. Strong in some respects, weak in others. Connected, yet divided. Okay? So what's interesting about the proposed peace arrangement is that it's not even being presented as a permanent peace. It's a 60-day agreement that we saw there that I just read to you from NPR. Think about that for a moment. 60 days, 2 months. History is filled with temporary ceasefires, temporary truces, temporary agreements, and temporary reductions in hostilities. We've seen periods where both sides agreed to pause only to return to confrontation later. And sometimes even within the days of their peace agreements, they're still striking each other. Something that I cannot understand, if you will. Now, Daniel's prophecy isn't really about whether a particular agreement lasts 60 days or 6 months or 6 years. The deeper question is whether the nations can achieve lasting unity and lasting peace through political arrangements alone. They can't. They will never. Daniel says the final phase of human history is iron mixed with clay. There is strength, but there is also division. So the United States is a strong empire, as we're seeing, but there's a lot of division within that empire too, right? There is cooperation, but there is also conflict. So we sometimes see China and the United States, and they're agreeing on some things, yet they disagree on other things. There are treaties, but there are also competing interests a part of those treaties, because it's all about power and money. If the agreement is only for 60 days, which they're suggesting, and they think extendable, it's also extendable because they want the war. It's profitable, it's lucrative. So they say it's extendable, that peace deal, the 60 days of peace are also extendable. Then perhaps the most important question is not whether the deal succeeds. The question is what happens on day 61. What happens when the underlying tensions, strategic interests, religious differences, security concerns, and geopolitical rivalries remain unresolved? and they are still unresolved. No matter what they're telling us, the United States suggests that it doesn't want Iran to have any nuclear weapons. Whether Iran has nuclear weapons, we're not sure. We know the United States always uses lies to justify what it's doing or what it doesn't want to do, right? So that is what we know. We know that Iraq, didn't have any weapons of mass destruction. Yet the United States, even though even the CIA suggested to Bush, the then Bush, George W. Bush, that Iraq did not have any weapons of mass destruction, right? The Secretary of State, the then Secretary of State, that was Colin Powell, actually went to the UN and did a big speech on that, even though he knew that it was a lie. But they sounded convincing, and the world believed, the Americans believed, and they went to war with Iraq, and we know the rest is history. Whether one supports Trump or opposes him is not the issue. This is what I want to say to you tonight. This is not about Trump or George W. Bush. It's about a system, and the system is iron mixed with clay. Whether a peace deal is negotiated tomorrow, next year, or 10 years from now, it's not the issue. The issue is this: can human diplomacy permanently solve the deep divisions of the world? Daniel's answer is no. No, not because diplomacy has no value, not because peace negotiations are bad, but because the underlying spiritual, political, cultural, and civilizational fractures remain. I repeat that, because the underlying spiritual, because religion is involved, political, because that is involved, cultural, yes, it's involved, and civilizational fractures remain. Okay? Human beings can negotiate ceasefires. They can sign agreements. They can establish frameworks, but they cannot eliminate the fallen nature of man. Man is greedy. He wants what he wants. And if he doesn't get it, then he is going to use his power to force people to get what he wants. So that is why history repeatedly cycles through peace and conflict, right? And that is what we're seeing here. Sometimes we have peace, sometimes we have conflict. The stone, the real focus of Daniel 2 is not Babylon, not Persia, not Greece, not Rome, not America, not Iran, not Cuba, not Jamaica, not Barbados. The focus is a stone cut out without human hands. The statue represents human political power, right? And we see that human political power cannot get us peace, cannot achieve peace, because we are humans and we are fallen. We have a fallen nature, and our nature is selfish and to control. Look at the baby, look at children, and you watch them sometimes and you see their selfish nature. If parents do not try to combat against their selfish nature, then you understand that they're going to grow up to become, right, some of the most evil people in the world, right? Some of those children that you're saying that they're nice and they're beautiful, those cuties can grow up to become some of the most evil and terrible people the world has ever seen. So you have to control their tempers, you've got to control their selfishness, because it's our natural human propensity. The stone represents God's kingdom. Daniel is telling us that mankind's ultimate solution will not come from Washington, Tehran, Brussels, Moscow, Beijing, or the United Nations. The final and lasting peace comes from a kingdom established by God, not by human governments. That is what we want to understand. So when we hear about a new peace agreement, we should welcome peace. We should, because by all means, we all want peace. Who likes wars? Because wars can kill us, right? And can create, starvation and famines and all other things that we don't want. We should hope fewer people die. And I'm praying for the Iranians. We should hope tensions decrease, and we should, because it helps us. Whatever is happening in Iran is going to affect us directly, eventually. But we should also remember Daniel's warning: the iron and clay do not truly adhere. They cannot come together. They will not come together, because iron cannot be mixed with clay. And we're still under the divided Roman empire under the United States of America. Now, the nations repeatedly attempt unity, but division remains. This is why every empire eventually struggles. That is why every political order eventually faces crisis. Now, there are people come on my platform and they will tell me, like, we have, and a great guy from Barbados, Corbin, he will say, oh, well, I don't believe that religion should just, we don't do anything. He suggests that religious people are just sit down and do nothing and we're passive. No, that's not it. When you understand that human beings are not going to be able to create peace by themselves, then you understand that you cannot support. You cannot support anything that these people are doing. Because all that they're doing, sometimes it might be good for good reasons too, for good intentions, right? But at the end of the day, human beings, fallen human beings with our fallen nature is not going to bring the world together, unfortunately. All right, unfortunately. History is replete with examples that will never happen. And that is why Daniel directs our attention away from the kingdoms of men and toward the kingdom of God. In any country that we could say, just by its constitution, the United States, that was a model nation, or could have been, it's not, but could have been a model nation for the entire world and all civilizations combined, is the United States and its constitution. But was it able to live out and to actuate all of those great lofty principles? No. We see that. So no matter what documents that they draft and peace treaties and deals that they sign, we know that men in their nature, because the founding fathers said all of us are created equal, yet they were practicing slavery. And many of you say that, and it is true. Because human beings are two-faced. We are selfish by nature. The peace of men may last for a season. The peace of God is the only peace that endures forever. And that is the only true peace, because man by himself cannot give you peace. Just like man by himself cannot give you rights. And that is why we believe in the natural rights, as John Locke suggests, right? That great philosopher, because the fact of the matter is that all rights come from God. Only he can give us rights because he is the creator. And that is why in the Constitution, these men, even though they were not religious as in the traditional sense of the word, but they understood that our rights cannot be given by men. Men will take away your rights or will misinterpret what rights you have. But our rights are objectively given to us by nature and by nature's God. Very important that you understand it. So audience, if we're going to understand Babylon and the relationship between political power and spiritual authority, we must begin a deep study of Daniel 2. In Daniel 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a troubling dream. He sees a massive image, a great statue composed of different metals. The dream is also disturbing, or disturbed him a lot, that he demands not only an interpretation, but that his wise men. So some of you think that these people on air, I can't remember some of these guys' names, these political theorists and these university, scholars are going to tell you what's going to happen. They are not able to tell you anything unless they consult with this chapter of Daniel. But that is wise men tell him the dream itself. But were the wise men able to tell him the dreams? The scholars and these great guys and the intellectuals? No. Even the, what they call these people, the esoterics, the members of the occult realm, they were not able, the voodoo priests, the Obia men and women were not able to tell him the dream that he had dreamt. They cannot do it, and they will never be able to do it. It is Daniel, through divine revelation, who reveals both the dream and its meaning. The statue consists head of gold, chest and arms of silver, we talked about that, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Right? I think I made a mistake in terms of saying sometimes the legs, but there's the feet that were partly of iron and partly of clay. Then something remarkable happens. A stone cut out without human hands strikes the image on its feet. The entire statue collapses. The gold, silver, bronze, iron and clay are crushed together and blown away like the chaff in the wind. Wow. You see these gigantic presidents and prime ministers and kings of the world, the Hitlers, right? And all of these great minds and great leaders and famous globally famous leaders, and they have died. They're just dust. They're just like the chaff in the wind, right? They no longer exist. Trump himself, who pretends as if he's Almighty God, he too is going to be like the chaff in the wind. The stone then becomes a great mountain and fills the whole earth. Daniel explains that these metals represent successive kingdoms that would arise in history. The head of gold is Babylon, as we've just suggested, represented by Nebuchadnezzar himself. Babylon was magnificent, wealthy, powerful, and glorious. Yet even Babylon would not last forever. And God said that it would not even come back. It's now like a desert. If you should go and to where the Babylonian kingdom was in Iraq, you'll see that it's a desert, because the Bible says that it will never come back. And many kings, even in Iraq, even Saddam Hussein, wanted to rebuild Babylon, and we know what happened to him. After Babylon would come another kingdom. After Babylon, we saw there was another kingdom that arose, represented by silver. Historically, this is understood as the Medo-Persian Empire, which conquered Babylon in 539 BC, which is now modern-day Iran. Could it be that Rome is still actually threatened by the fact would Iran want to reestablish its a modern version of the Persian Empire? These are questions we have to ask ourselves. So Rome is essentially trying to say, let's get rid of these kingdoms that once were in world history and they were powerful. Let's get rid of them, because Rome does not want any competitor, even though it's divided Rome. After the Medes and Persians comes the Bronze Kingdom, commonly identified as Greece under Alexander the Great and his successors. Greek culture, language, and philosophy, right? Influence spread throughout the known world. Even now, most of what we know as philosophers came out of Greece. And even a lot of the Roman Empire, philosophers rather, a lot of the Roman philosophers got their thing. And we know that Greece got it from Egypt too. So we see where human beings actually influenced each other, but they never last. They never last, right? So then comes the fourth kingdom, represented by iron. Iron crushes and breaks all things. Most interpreters identify this as Rome, whose military power dominated the Mediterranean world for centuries. And was it not an iron empire? We know the terrible nature of Rome and how it dominated the world then. The final stage is represented by the feet and toes of iron mixed with clay. This kingdom possesses some of Rome's strength, but also significant weakness. The elements do not truly adhere to one another. There is power, but also division and instability. And I believe that the current iteration of the Roman Empire, which is the United States of America, I think that she's using and modeling militarism after the Roman Empire. And when Rome became a military empire, it started to decline. It started to decline, and rapid decline. And the United States is going to even decline quicker and faster. Christians have debated the exact identity of this final phase for centuries. Some see it as the later Roman Empire. Others see it as a future global political power or order. Others view it as the divided nations that emerged from Rome's legacy and continue to shape the modern world. But the focus of the prophecy is not merely identifying kingdoms. The focus is the stone. The stone is not built by human hands. It does not emerge from military conquest, elections, revolutions, or political alliances. It comes from God. The stone strikes the image and destroys the entire system represented by statue. Notice that the gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay are all crushed together. The prophecy suggests that despite their differences, These kingdoms belong to the same succession of human empire. Babylon falls. Persia falls, which is now modern day Iran. Babylon, we say it is now, well, it was modern day, the modern iteration of Babylon is Iraq, all right? Greece falls, and Greece is Greece. We still know it as Greece. Rome falls, and we know that Rome had what? The united Rome, and we also had divided Rome. So every empire eventually falls. All of the divided Roman empires, Britain, Spain, France, all of these were empires, and they fell. The message is that no human political order, no matter how wealthy, sophisticated, religious, military, or technologically advanced, possesses permanent sovereignty. None. Whether it could be wealthy, having all people are all billionaires, right? It could be the empire with the most educated and sophisticated people. It will not last. The iron shall not mix with clay. They shall not cleave one to another. Very important that we understand this very important fact and reality. The stone then grows into a mountain that fills the whole earth, right? So the mountain that fills the whole earth, which represents that it's going to control the entire kingdoms of the world. Okay, so that is what we need to. So Daniel interprets this as a kingdom of God. That's a stone cut out without hands, and then it fills the entire mountain. And in the days of these kings, Daniel 2 verse 44 suggests, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom? Because the earth here that we have is a kingdom too, right? But it is divided into different kingdoms, because when Adam was born and Eve, that the kingdom of the earth was given to them and that they should dominate. This was Adam's dominion under God. But Adam actually gave it to the devil through sinning, right? So who controls the kingdoms of this world now? And the earth is a kingdom? The devil himself, until Christ restores dominion back to Adam, and then Adam will rule under God. So, and in the days of these kingdoms shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and it shall stand forever. Because these kingdoms don't last. Whether they're African kingdoms, they are Asian kingdoms, or they're European kingdoms, they will not last. From a biblical perspective, history is not ultimately moving toward the triumph of Babylon or Persia or Greece or Rome or America or China or Russia or any other earthly power. History is moving toward the establishment of God's kingdom. That is why Daniel 2 remains so powerful. It reminds us that behind the rise and fall of governments, civilizations, and empires stands a greater reality. The kingdoms of men appear permanent in their own generation. I repeat that. The kingdoms of men appear permanent in their own generation, but they are temporary because they die like the chaff in the wind. And Trump is going to go one of these days. If it's Trump, or Biden, they're all going to go. The stone alone endures. The kingdom of God alone remains when every empire of this world has passed away. So Babylon thought it was going to last forever. And remember now, if you read Daniel 4, you realize that Nebuchadnezzar actually ate grass. God allowed him to eat grass before he actually, confessed his sins and, worshiped the God of heaven. A king that was so proud, right? He was right there out there like birds and animals eating grass, right? God humiliated him for him to understand that the God of heaven rules, and he sets up and he puts down whomsoever he will. So Daniel 2 represents a succession of world empires, head of gold, and we saw that it was Babylon, chest and arms of silver, Medo-Persia, all of these empires, belly and thighs of bronze, and Greece, and all of Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire and established Greek dominance around the world, right? After Alexander's death, his empire was divided among his generals, but Greek culture continued to influence the Mediterranean and Near East for centuries. So the legs of iron, 168 BC to 476 AD, Western Roman Empire. and it's still lasting, even though it was divided. Rome gradually defeated the Greek successor kingdoms and became the dominant world power. Iron symbolizes Rome's military strength and ability to crush its enemies that the United States has right now. But will that last? No. The two legs. Some interpreters note that Rome eventually developed into two major divisions: Western Roman Empire, Rome, Eastern Roman Empire, and we dealt with that on last Sunday night. If you did not watch that video, please go and watch it. The Constantinople Byzantium Empire. This is often associated with the statue's two legs. Feet of iron and clay divided Rome, AD 476 onward. The Western Roman Empire formally collapsed in AD 476. That's the united Rome, if you will. However, Rome's civilization, laws, institutions, language. From Latin, we have so many, languages that have evolved from Latin, right? Religion and culture continued through the kingdoms that emerged from its territory. Many historicists, commentators identify the 10 toes with the major tribal kingdoms that arose from Western Roman Empire. While lists vary somewhat among commentators, a common list includes the Franks. These were the 10 divided divisions of Rome, the 10 divided kingdoms, I should say. The Franks, which are now what we call modern-day France. The Anglo-Saxons, which is now modern-day England. Then we have Alemanni, right? And remember now that the Spanish name for Germany is that sort of, So we have the modern Germany, and we have the Burgundians, parts of Switzerland and France. We have the Visigoths, who are what we call is now modern-day Spain. The Suevi, or the Suevi, however you pronounce it, Portugal, modern-day Portugal, and the Lombards, not modern-day Italy, and Heruli, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals. Now, these three were rooted up and destroyed because they were known as the barbarians, right? The Heruli, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals were actually eventually destroyed. The entire civilization was wiped out. In historicist Protestant interpretation, the Heruli, Ostrogoths, and Vandals were eventually uprooted, which is often connected to the prophecy of the little horn, which represents the papacy in Daniel 7. Now, how does the United States fit in? The United States is not mentioned directly in Daniel 2. However, some historicist interpreters argue that America emerged out of the broader civilization that descended from Rome. Consider the inheritance. Roman law influenced British common law. The English language and institutions came through Britain. The American Senate was consciously modeled after the Roman Senate in certain respects. The architecture of Washington, D.C. uses Roman symbols and styles. The American Republic borrowed concepts from Rome's Republican tradition. In this sense, America can be viewed as a daughter civilization of the broader Roman world rather than a completely separate civilization. Under this interpretation, the iron of Rome continues in Western civilization, where the clay represents division, fragmentation, and internal weakness. The historicist argument would therefore be Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, divided Rome, which we are now living in, modern Western nations, including nations descended from Europe's Roman heritage, such as the United States. The stone now, the focus of Daniel 2, however, is not ultimately the toes, the tribes, the Europe, or America. The prophecy culminates with the stone cut without hands, which is something quite mystical to most humans. The stone destroys the entire image at once. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay are all swept away together. This suggests that all human empires, regardless of era, belong to the same succession of earthly power. The kingdom established by the stone is different. It is not founded by military conquest, elections, dynasties, or human institutions. It is established by God and will never be destroyed. That is the central message Daniel wants the audience to remember, every empire rises, every empire falls, but the kingdom of God endures forever. So tonight we've discussed Trump, Iran, diplomacy, war, and peace. But Daniel's message was never really about Persia, Rome, America, or Iran. It was about the limits of human power. Every empire promises stability. Every ruler promises peace. Every generation believes it can solve the world's problems. Yet Babylon fell, Persia fell, Greece fell, Rome fell. And Daniel tells us that the final world order remains iron mixed with clay, strong in appearance, divided in reality. So whether this deal succeeds for 6 months, 5 years, or 10 years, the deeper problem remains. The nations do not cleave together. That is why our hope cannot rest in presidents, diplomats, treaties, or empires. The stone is coming, and when the stone strikes the image, every kingdom of men gives way to the kingdom of God. That is Daniel's message. That is history's lesson, and that is why no human peace deal will ever be the final peace. None, at least inked out by men. That ending, this ending that I'm giving to you right now should give you the understanding, should lend you the understanding that we are living in a time of upheaval that will never bring us true peace. And that is what I think from this discussion. Let me see if there's any thing now in the chat. We shall look at your comments. So let's look at your broader comments and see what you're saying. We have here Z. Let me begin. Sorry, I'm looking at the chats now. We have, you're watching from, share your thoughts in the chat. Oh, sorry, this is my thing that I had caught. Good evening. So glad to be here. I missed 2 nights. Yeah, thank you so much, and welcome back to the program. Excuse me for interrupting, Andrew, but is there anything significant? The Pope being the first American Pope, feel free to answer after your presentation. Yes, it is significant, because when we look at the fact that historically the United States was always very anti-Pope, and anti-popery, anti-papacy, even anti any form of the Vatican involved in American politics. The fact that in the 1920s, when you had Alfred Smith going up as a candidate for the president of the United States, and the fact that the US citizens they cried out against it, and they screamed and said no, they would never allow a Catholic president in their country, because wherever you have Catholicism or Catholic politicians, Rome is going to influence that country. Because remember now that when you are Catholic, you are first, committed to the Pope of Rome and not to the country in which you live, right? That is what people have to understand. Your first commitment, your first allegiance is to the Roman papacy. So yes, there is a lot of fact that the United States is quietly moving back to its Roman heritage, right? And to the Roman philosophy of church-state sort of fusion. So true, the U.S. also in signing the MOU agreed to facilitate the payment of $300 billion to Iran as compensation. However, it has been stated that when Iran discovers that the Americans will not honor the agreement, all hell will break loose. Right. Nobody can buy peace. Right? We can't bribe people into accepting what we want them to do. Peace is earned, right? And it's earned through being transparent with people, respecting each other's, space and their differences. Remember, even in your marital relationship, there can't be a peace. So a man might have thousands of dollars and he might decide that he wants a wife, and he might go and buy the prettiest lady. But will they have peace? No, because each has to respect each other. Of course, money is important in any marital relationship. But the fact of the matter is that money cannot buy peace. It will not buy respect from both spouses. Therefore, what Trump is offering and the bribe, I'm sure lots of bribing is in it, it's not going to work, right? Z is saying that, speaking of China, where does it fit in Daniel 2 prophecy? Now, as we suggested in the presentation, the Bible is not referring to particular nation states. The Bible refers to the whole matter of the system of control and the fact that some of these empires. Now, I want to do a presentation very soon, and I think I did one previous when we talked about Chinese and technocracy, that the Chinese technocracy came from the United States, right? We think a lot that China is working on its own, but China is not working on its own. Its relationship with China. That is why we're seeing lots of Chinese, American billionaires living in China, investing in China, because China, the Chinese system is the same, belongs to the same Western Roman civilization, if you will. Yes, it does. Yeah, so we have this, then we have the next one. China is Iran. The remainder confederacy is Iran. They will mix. They will not mix, right? And that's what we're saying. No civilization, whether it's China and Iran, it will not mix. If the Roman Empire, which sort of was living on the same continent, they were not able to mix. If Europe and the United States are not able to mix, even though we're saying that they're sort of coming from the same civilization and they're not able to mix, China nor Russia are going to be able to mix. Or from two different cultural perspectives, they're just not going to mix, right? So don't allow difference of, the perspective or your misunderstanding of history to tell you that they're going to mix. Then we have Psalm 83, remaining iron, clay is the heavy laden debt America and Israel lay upon themselves. America is insolvent. Now, remember now that when we talk about Israel, Israel is just a phony nation that was created. Israel has absolutely nothing to do with what they are doing. Israel is just being used as a deceptive nation for the United States to dominate the Israel. Right? So Israel has nothing to do. In fact, if you understand the biblical history well, you'll understand that the Jews, right, were already defeated in AD 70. God wanted nothing more to do with them. And from that time, as a nation, that is. And from that time, they have not been doing well in the world in terms of. So what you're seeing is deception. But you believe in that deception, so you just have to stick with it. Daniel 2, verse 43, in the King James Version, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another. That's what we're saying, right? So they will try to unite. They will try to use politics. They will try to use economics. They will try to use whatever they can use, right, to merge, but they shall not cleave one to another, which means that we're not going to have a united system of peace, and that is what they're seeking to do. Remember now, we're fractured, we're polarized, and many nations, even internally, are struggling to unite, so we know that the world will never unite in this current dispensation. There are two schools interpreting the impact of the stone. One says it represents Christ's first coming, the other says it represents Christ's second coming. It has to be the second coming because he already come. The first coming was when he came and he died, right? So the second coming is when he's coming back now as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. When he came the first time, he submitted to the nations here because he was a citizen of in the Middle East. So the fact of the matter is that, and Rome was the power under when Christ came on earth. We had the Roman Empire then, right? So that's also very interesting. He was living under the so-called United Roman Empire. That's Christ. So that his second coming is what is going to be the stone cut out without hand that will eventually fill the world and the mountain, because he's coming back as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Another, even as iron is not mixed with clay, right? So yes, and remember now, the iron is Rome. There's nothing in it about Israel in terms of, no Bible scholar or commentator will talk about Israel being and Rome, because remember now that the Jews were also under the Roman Empire and they were persecuted, right? They were persecuted heavily by the Roman Empire. In fact, if we look back at our recent history also, the Jews were persecuted by the United States and by Britain and all that stuff. They're only using them now to be able to, that's the United States, to achieve its purpose in the Middle East. The Middle East has always been a very difficult a place to win and to conquer rather. So the United States is using now this sort of religious undertone by saying, oh, the people of Israel are God's chosen people. So if we're on their side, that means that God is going to bless us. That is not going to happen. So that's what we're saying here, that the iron is mixed with clay. The United States knows that it doesn't have legitimacy around the world. It knows that nobody believes what it is doing anymore. So what it's doing now, it's merging religion. It's now merging religion and suggesting that if we can say Israel is the people of God or the people of God, then it means therefore that we're going to get people on our side. And that's why you see the evangelicals merge with the Trump administration, because they think that they can gain some legitimacy in that sort of deal. Now we have here, just as Prophet Jeremiah said, it does not belong to man, right? Yes, absolutely. People think that, one of the things we have to understand is that the kingdoms of this world belong to men. Because God is not the one who, Christ actually gained back the kingdom at his death. But the fact of the matter, he will fully get it back after the devil and his angels and evil have been destroyed upon this world. So the kingdoms of this world belong right now to the men who are, and the system that is ruling over it. But what we're suggesting to you, men cannot bring about peace. The kingdoms of this world will not be able to usher in peace in the world. Never. And that is what the Bible is suggesting. And that is what we are seeing. It's not only the Bible suggesting it, but that's what we're seeing it as we are looking at the world and looking at geopolitics. That every time they're calling for peace and we think some peace is going to be ushered in, there is never something comes up, a terrorist event, an economic collapse. Something always happens, and then they go right back to square one and ground zero, and it continues unabated. Now, Z is saying, here's another question. Daniel is an Old Testament book, which means it is a part of the Judaic canon. Does Judaism share the same interpretation of this prophecy as Christianity? Yes, because that's what we call it, the Judeo-Christian religion. Now, remember now that the Old and New Testament are, in fact, the canon of the Bible. That nothing is different in the Old Testament from the only thing that we see was the pre sanctuary, when they had to go and before Christ came and died, they had to actually go and they had to kill lambs, and so that they could get forgiveness of sin. So the sacrificial system, but even so, when we study the sacrificial system, it helps us to understand also what Christ is doing in the heavenly sanctuary there in heaven. So nothing in the Old Testament is to be discarded. All right, it's things that we can learn, because that's why we call it the Judeo-Christian Bible, the Judeo-Christian belief system, because Jews represented the people of God. Who wrote the Bible? Who's the author of the Bible? Who is the author of the Torah? Christ himself, right? So it means, therefore, that he's author of both Old and New, and that's why we can rely on the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. Were Hebrews the real Jews by heritage? We have nothing to do with the religion of Esau, Edom. We're not pretending to be ourselves. Let's be very clear now. And if you read the book of Paul, I think it might have been in Galatians or Romans, he's telling us that Christians should not get involved in all of this ethnic who belongs to whom. And what we need to understand, that we're going to be in two groups. One, are you on the side of Christ? Or are you on the side of the world, on the side of the devil? That's what we have to understand. When we get now into who is what, as Black people do often too, and who ethnic and who was the best in terms of who invented that, these are things that the Bible is telling students of the Bible not to be engaged in. They're not going to give you anything that is going to help you to save your soul. The Bible is about saving soul and helping us to understand the world in which, and also to reject any form of deception that fills our world. So let's not get into rabbit holes about who is who. Are the Jews in Palestine, or the Jews in Israel? Are they the real Jews? We're not going to get into that conversation, right? The Bible, because that is not going to anything that is going to edify us. We want things that will edify us into understanding the deceptions in the world, and you want to be on Christ, in Christ's group. You don't want to be in the group of the world, because there's just two groups. They're not going to be black and white. There's two groups you have. Those who belong on Christ's side and those who belong on the world and the nations and their kingdoms and the devil. We're not converting to ourselves. Yes, so Babylonians and Assyrians attacked the northern southern kingdom and converted to Babylonianism, not Jewish, because that is false. You cannot convert. What you have this? Edom means who converted through Babylon is Israel's. As I'm suggesting to you again, IDC, do not get so much into ethnic, and what you want to understand is that we are living in a world in which no matter where you stand, if you're in Africa or you're in Asia or you're in the Caribbean or you're in Europe, the kingdoms of the world are actually waging a war against God's people, right? Or waging a war against people who desire freedom, right? They are. So what we are here trying to do is not trying to decipher who is better from who is worse. We're trying to see how the system is against us, working against us, and will eventually, if we are not on the right side, will demolish us. So that is what we have to understand. If we go now and side with the US or with China or with Palestine, we can't side with any nation. We have to side with the truth, and we know that eventually the stone that is cut out without hands is going to defeat the entire world and their kingdoms. Now, the invaders of America, Europe, Rome, Greece, or Esau, not Japheth. Okay, well, Esau is Japheth is also represent the people of Europe. So yeah, not sure what you're saying there. The Bible speaks of the Most High punishment to Lebanon, Gaza, Israel, Ishmael, Esau, Edom. Yes, I can see that you're coming from the Hebrew sort of religion and you're getting into that sort of polemics in terms of ethnicities and stuff like that. And the Bible is talking against, preaches against that, getting into these sort of etymologies, because all that these things do, they divide us and they do not unite us in the truth. Right? The Confederacy will face judgment. Amalek, yes, and you're telling me about all those people. The land of Japheth and original culture is Europe, Rome, Greece, and Asia. Well, no, Shem is the people from Asia that came from Shem. They're actually Shemites, just like the people of the Middle East. None of that belonged to Esau, the self-proclaimed whites. Wow. They are Moab. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me just be clear here. We're not going to talk about race, because race is a social construct, as we've just said, right? The Bible has nothing to do with race, about race. What the Bible talks about is evil and good versus evil. That is what the Bible talks about. And whether you are black or you're white or you're Chinese or you're whatever you are, you can be in those two groups. You can be in those two groups. I think that what has happened is that our education system, because it's also very Roman, our education system, let's be very clear, is extremely Roman in orientation. So it has helped us. We are divided, we're fractured, as the Bible says. We're fractured, and that nothing that happens now is going to be able to bring about the peace that we desire. It's not going to happen under this sort of rulership. Now, no, the indigenous copper-colored Indians created English of America. Yeah, well, they created it. So if that's your thing, then fine. I don't think history. I think all peoples that are in America, whether they be the indigenous, blacks, and whites, have contributed to the American culture. Right? Let's all be fair. Let's all be intelligent. Let's all read our history and understand that that is factual. But to suggest that only the indigenous people built America is nonsense. Now we have IDC is saying Roman colonial invaders spoke Latin. Okay, did they all speak Latin, or did they speak other languages like Spanish and Portuguese and French? And remember, we're talking about the divided Roman Empire. We must understand that we talked about the iron, right? And the iron mixed with clay. And we said the iron mixed with clay is divided, the divided Roman Empire. Western Europe was divided into 10 kingdoms. I read it. I told you about them. We talked about the Franks. We talk about the Lombards. We talk about the Anglo-Saxons. And these are countries. But we said that 3 of them were rooted up. The Heruli, the Ostrogoths, right? And the Vandals. They were uprooted. Their civilizations were completely destroyed. But Rome is not now divided. It became united, rather. It was divided, and it is still divided. And the United States is only an offshoot of Western Europe, right? So it's among the countries, we can say, among the divided Western Empire. And you are not saying anything, Simon Show. You have to get your act together. So we have that Revelation 11, verse 14 says, the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. So can you give us what you're saying? Can you make your point? Then we have error in the chat. Okay, let's go now to, was Israel right to devastate Palestine in the war last year? Do you think God approved of such behavior? Now, this is the whole point we're saying, that there's no kingdom here that belongs to God. Let me repeat that. The purpose of Daniel, the study that we did, there's no kingdom on earth, whether it's Israel or it is Palestine or it is Europe, England or America. These kingdoms are not kingdoms of God. They are kingdoms of the devil, and the devil has given power to humans to control. So God does not agree, absolutely not, with anything that Israel is doing to Palestinians, right? But the fact of the matter is that he wants everybody in the world to understand that if we're going to really deal with our problem, lasting peace is not going to happen in the world. That's for sure. The Bible is saying that they want peace, but their peace is phony. So the kingdoms of this world, the Roman Empire, which they divided Roman Empire, what we have is a mixture of iron and clay. Okay, so America controls Israel, we know that. And America wants to control the Middle East. So what it's doing, it's using the Israel as a way of controlling Palestine and the entire Middle East. Now, there is also another school of thought that the Vatican wants to rule the world from Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is a very important state to the Vatican. And that is why they had the Crusades. The Vatican had the Crusades against the Muslims for years, right? And they were defeated. They did not gain control. So now that they are, the United States is in power, the Vatican is known to use other empires. They used Germany, they used Spain, right? They used Portugal, they used other European nations to carry out their agenda, right? So the same thing that they're doing right now with the United States, helping for the United States to exhaust itself in the Middle East. The Vatican wants it, even though America wants it too, for the purpose of oil and controlling the world through oil and other resources in the Middle East. At the end of the day, the Vatican wants to rule the world from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the center of the world, if you understand what that means. People forget Israel is consisted of 12 tribes. And remember now that Israel as a nation is no longer God's chosen people. Israel as a nation does not represent God's chosen people. This is a false religion that you see people in America and other evangelicals actually propagating. But that is built on falsehood. I'm going to let the Lord break it down for you, buddy. Hang on. So we have, then we have lots of things from IDC coming up. It's okay. Yeah. I want some other perspective so we can have a broader discussion. The Star of David and Donald Trump organizers linked alleged pedophilia rings such as Epstein scandal directly to Western systems and Israeli ideology. But let me just say something to you. Ever since the world has been made an empire, so you go to the Babylonian Empire, the Medes and the Persians, some of these empires they practice all of these things, sacrifices, right, where children were sacrificed. So this is not just only have to do with Epstein and the West, has to do with a ring across the world, around the world, in which these people believe sometimes they have some weird philosophies. Look at Africa, for example. There are some Africans who believe that if you have sex with a young child, that you will be able to get over whatever disease that you're going through, right? So is that true? No. But this is a sort of demonic activity in which some of our leaders think that when they engage in these sacrifices, they're doing something. The Vatican is known for that too, for actually I'll go back to look at some of your responses. IDC. Let me go back up because I thought there were other responses. I wanted to make other people in the chat, give their perspective. Then we have, what have he do with me, O Tyre and Sidon and all the coast of Palestine? Will he render me to recompense? Will he recompense me swiftly and speedily? Will I return your recompense? I want you to make connections, guys. I don't want you to just read a scripture from and not making the connection. Here in Daniel 2, that's what we're doing, trying to make connection with what we're seeing happening in the modern world, right? And how rulers and kingdoms of this world are actually going to be demolished. And that's the purpose of Daniel 2, that it tells us that these kings and these kingdoms will not cleave one to another. Up on your head, because you have given me, yes, you're just quoting and you're not making connection. On this platform, we want you to make connection, not just to quote scriptures, as I did for you, I quoted, but I contextualized and I showed you what things meant. That's the whole purpose of studying the Bible, that we have to connect our ideas. Revelation 2 verse 9 says, I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Right? And the fact of the matter is that, if you look back in the times of Christ, right, and during the time of the apostles, that the Jews, they behaved as if they controlled God's word. Right? And that they were only the only people in the world to be saved. And they pretended as so. And we see now Israel behaving, even though we all know, but many people don't know, that Israel is no longer God's chosen people. Right? As a nation, they are not. They gave up that right. They didn't want to follow God. And God eventually destroyed their temple and told them that they need to go and serve whether they want to serve, because people don't want to serve God. That's the whole point. People want to just get the benefits from what God has to offer, and that's what the Jews, they only wanted the prosperity that they were actually going through, that they experienced, but they didn't want to do what God told them. They didn't want to be obedient to his word. And the same thing with America. They only want the trophies of what the Bible says, and the Bible blesses them. That is all they want. They do not want anything at all. They don't want to hear anything about obedience to God and his word. All right, so I think I'm not going to spend long. I thought more of you would have been here, so we can end the live. I just wanted to present it, and perhaps during the replay, other people will see it and will join. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for coming. Make sure you share the live, and we'll talk in another one. Ciao.